Okay, perfect. Awesome.
Yes, great.
All right, well, yeah, welcome everybody to Road to Flutter City. Today I'm going to be talking about Flutter Piano. My name is Rody Davis, and I have been using Flutter since Flutter Beta 2. So I use it professionally at a company called Cross Media, where we build mortgage apps for CRMs, and we've very aggressively used Flutter in actually a couple apps that we have. In addition, I also make a lot of my apps on my own. When Flutter Create came out, I thought it was a really cool idea and the constraints, so I decided to build a piano app. So today I'm going to kind of walk you through a little bit about Flutter and my process, as well as an example of the Flutter Piano.
All right. All right.
All right, so first of all, what is Flutter? Well, Flutter is like we talked about earlier, it's a mobile-first SDK that can run on desktop as well as web now. It has native performance because it compiles down to machine code, unlike React Native, which runs in a virtual machine. You get some really high-quality animations as well as pixel-perfect UI because Flutter draws everything on the screen. You're not having to worry about building XML files or even Swift using the native components. You can really build the brand exactly like you want for whatever client or company that you want to. So here's an example of a stateful widget. So any stateful widget in Flutter extends this class called state. And because of that, it's actually able to hold its own values. Now, to rebuild the widget tree, you have to manually call set state. And in contrast, this is a stateless widget, which does not extend state, and it just returns whatever is given to it. So an example of a stateful widget would be if you want to have like the demo application is a counter application. Every time that you want to increase the counter by 1, you need to call set state, and that increases a variable. Now, in Stateless Widget, you would use that for if you're composing your widget tree of smaller widgets, you'd have the Stateless Widget that just passes through whatever it has. All right, so when you're getting first started with Flutter, it can be really daunting because of all the widgets. Everything is a widget in Flutter, including the material app, including down to the button, as well as individual properties and the themes. So once you get started, it's a lot easier, but definitely like the first couple weeks in the Flutter are going to be overwhelming in that sense. One of the things that Flutter provides that a lot of other SDKs don't is the flexibility of whatever state management tool you want to use. Now, there's a lot of different options out there. Currently, Block is one that's used a lot internally by Google. This is used between the Angular Dart and Flutter shared platform that they can use, share a lot of the business logic code. There's Redux, which was actually made by Facebook, and it's a one-way relationship of data. So the data comes into the model, and then it outputs to the view. There's Scoped Model, which is very popular. It came from the Fuchsia platform, which is a tool that allows the platform that Google's been working on. More recently, Remy and the Flutter team have come up with Provider, which is a version of Scope Model, but it allows you to do dependency injection down into any part of your app. There's MobX, which is a similar to Redux. There's RX Start, as well as you can just use vanilla set state, but we'll see later how important that is to look at other tools because you're going to have to keep passing down and passing back up data. You could also completely build your own custom state management if you wanted to. So you really do have 100% freedom. Here's an example of calling set state. So here you have your value. You have your method for calling set state, and then you can present that value itself. Every time you do something, you have to call set state. Otherwise, it won't rebuild your widget tree. And this is what you get out of the box. Now, one really cool thing about Flutter is the community. Flutter has been able to has been getting really popular, and so many people have been putting packages into Flutter. There's a really good chance that if you're looking for something, it is already done on Flutter and is already released on Dart and Dartpub. That's what we call it. And what's cool about that is you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, and you can almost everything on Dartpub is open source, so you can just go right to the code. So let's just do an example real quick. So I can go to Dartpub. There we go. All right, so let's search for a calendar widget. So we have a couple different options. You can even go down and view the dependencies itself. This will have what you need to set up on iOS and Android. Almost every one of these include an example as well. If you're curious, you can always tap on the repository. You can go to the GitHub and you can check the issues to see if it'll work well. This is also how you can manually override dependencies from GitHub if there's an issue. Like a while back, Android X was a really big deal. So yeah, so I would say before you try to make a custom widget, I would try to look at Dartpub first, because there's a good chance, like I said, that it's already done. So yeah, so we had a Flutter Create contest that just recently finished, and one of the biggest things about that was you had to build an app with like less than 5 kilobytes worth of code. For reference, that's like less than 180 lines of code, which is pretty difficult. And you can't use the majority of your code can't come from plugins. The code has to be graded on different criteria. So there was code quality, beauty, novelty, overall execution, and there was a grand prize overall. There was also a limited timeline, but what made that nice is that there were just simple rules. So you could just like focus on building and not have to be worrying about like building a full app. You're just worrying about this small little project. So with 200 lines of code, there's definitely a lot of design constraints that you have. It also has to be open source, and to get into as much code as possible, it really mattered about minifying it. So that means that it didn't look pretty, but it was as condensed as possible. So for mine, I came up with the idea to do the piano because I was a musician growing up, and that's a huge part of my life, and I wanted to bring in that to development. I'm also the one that came up with the MIDI plugin for Flutter, so it allows you to, with a very simple API, be able to play MIDI on Android and iOS. And also, it's something that you can generate. A piano has a series of octaves, and that they only change minimal values. So I figured I could build something out like that. And just for a frame of reference, I built this entire Flutter Piano app in less than 8 hours. And I released it within 24 hours of the contest opening. So after that, I got to work with the community, and I decided to make the code lab. I'll have links to all this on my GitHub afterwards, but you can go through the entire step-by-step tutorial that I had online, as well as I made I've been making some YouTube videos about it as well. Also, you can go down to the App Store on Android and iOS, and you can see that. So I'll also have this link too. So you can actually download it right now on your phone and play with it if you want to. I released it free for, I think, this month, and it's actually got over 16,000 downloads in just a couple of days. So it's a really cool way to give back to the community and being able to see everybody use it. So, and I would also like to just point out that I'm also using CodeMagic to deploy all my apps in the cloud. And if you're not familiar, CodeMagic is a tool that allows you, that's built for Flutter, that allows you to release your apps on iOS and Android right from your home screen. So if you look in here, you can see, you can have your app, you can deploy your builds And it, like I said, it's made for Flutter, so you can go in and choose all of your specific Flutter settings. And you can build for iOS and Android, as well as choose your actual Flutter channel. And there we go. All right, so now I'm going to just kind of show you around the Flutter Piano app. And there we go. All right, so first of all, so let's start with the pubspec.yaml. So in every Flutter project, you're going to have this. It's going to have like your basic app settings. This is where you manage your dependencies for what your app. This is also where you can include information about who built the app, where it's located, and what version. With the later versions of Flutter, you can now include a version number that when you build your app, it'll actually build the iOS and the Android side. So you can do auto incrementing if you want to. It's really helpful because before you had to manually go into each project and do that. This is also where you specify your assets. So for this example, I have all my assets in a top level folder. I can include those here and then link to them here in the pubspec. You can use optionally do material design. You don't have to. It's on by default, but you could actually run your own complete design theme if you wanted to. In a lot of my apps, I do on iOS, it looks like iOS, and on Android, it looks like material design. And it usually includes this Cupertino icons package as well. So here's the Flutter MIDI plugin I built, and then I'm also relying on Tonic, which is a music plugin that just has all the basic stuff like scales and pitches and just the conversions. So if you look, this entire app is 143 lines of code. It came out to actually be 51,200 bytes, or yeah, 5024. And here's the app running. So as you can see, really fast and responsive. It has the full keyboard, and you can play as many notes as you want to. You can also change the key width. And you can also toggle the labels on and off. Perfect. So as you can see, let's go through this build method. So you're gonna, every Flutter and Dart application, even the ones from the command line, all have this main method. This is where your app entry point is. Here we call our first widget, which is my app. This my app is a stateful widget, and what it does is as soon as the widget starts, I have to load the asset bundle. This is the root asset bundle that Flutter provides. This is a good example. If you ever want to load something that's not a image or text, this is how you can load any file. So this is just an arbitrary .sf2 file called a sound font, and I'm actually able to load any file type I want into Flutter. So what I do is I take that, I load that byte data, and I pass it right down into Flutter MIDI.prepare. So now that the MIDI is up and running, I have to define a couple variables. So I'm going to specify the key width. Because it's dynamic, I want it to be based off of an 80-point width, and I can change the percentage based on whatever the slider's at, which is this width ratio, as well as the Boolean to show and hide the labels. So here we start with our material app. You can use either material app or Cupertino app for your application. In this example, I went with material. You can choose your theme. So I went with a dark theme. And for the home, I have a scaffold. The scaffold is the thing that provides you with basic things like an ability to add an app bar and a floating action button or a bottom tab bar. All these things you get out of scaffold for free. And you can customize them any way you want. You can even build your own if you wanted to. You can extend it. So here we have the menu. This is the thing right here that is going to have our variables. So we have an instance called drawer, which the scaffold can take. And this handles, what is nice about Flutter is this handles all the elevation. So if you see, it actually hides the background right here, or it shows a scrim color. And this is really handy for just out of the box, simple declarative UI. I add a little bit of padding. Here's a slider. So this is an example of calling set state on a change. So slider itself is actually a stateless widget, and it has to tell you every time that the value underneath it changes. And then when I'm doing that, I'm calling set state, which recalls this build method, and then that build method rebuilds the slider with a new value. If you didn't use set state, you wouldn't be able to move the slider back and forth. Here's a divider just to make it a little bit more readable. And here's an example of a Boolean. Now, something you can do with the more recent versions of Flutter is you can have this thing called adaptive. So if you change that, now when it reloads, it'll actually look like the iOS icon. And if you take that away, it's going to look like the material. So that's a new thing in Flutter that makes it really easy to reduce the amount of code that you're doing on iOS and Android. Not everything supports this, but there's more and more widgets that are coming out that do that. This is also our app bar that includes our title, our center. And here's where the real magic happens. So we take in a list view. A list view can have multiple different modes. You can just pass in a list of objects, which is called a children, or you can use this builder method, which is really nice because all you have to do is specify a count, and then it'll call this item builder for every single item in that list. You would use this if you either don't know how many items are in the list, or if you're going through just thousands and thousands of items, you want to be, because this will handle, like if you guys are familiar with Recycle View or the Table View controller on iOS, this handles reloading and only showing the widgets that are on the screen at any given point. Here I can specify a scroll controller. So this is a thing that actually can manage the list view. You can update this independently. And I'm just saying initial scroll offset, which will load it to middle C. Otherwise, if you don't have the scroll controller, it will just start at the beginning. So if I do this, if I comment it out and hit restart, and this is an example of hot restart in Flutter, which actually restarts from the very beginning, you'll see that it goes to the on C1. And if we take this back and restart again, it'll load right to middle C. And if you want to just update the changes in your app, you can use hot reload. But anytime that your build method changes, or your main method or anything that's part of your state, you need to use hot restart. So if we go down here, some of this is specific just to, and we're also specifying the scroll direction. So by default, list views scroll vertically, but I'm using this list view to scroll horizontally. And you just pass that with a simple access parameter. I'm getting the index. So in this case, I want to find the octave. And so I'm rebuilding this section for every single octave in the piano. So here is just an example of one octave. You'll see that it has a stack. A stack is a way for you to build two widgets on top of each other and position them accordingly. So I have a row, which takes up the entire width of the stack and the entire space. And I have another position that takes up just, 75% of that space giving at the top. So here, this bottom parameter, it's giving that padding, so this white area. Each one of these, I'm actually passing in the MIDI value. So this would be 24 plus whatever I is times 12. And then I'm saying if it's accidental or not. So the accidentals are up here, the black keys at the top. And also, like we talked about earlier, like the flexible widget on the video that we showed, this will fill up the space as much as possible. So in this case, I'm using space between, which will try to make all the keys the correct width. On the outsides, I'm dividing the widths by 2, and then I'm adding a key in the middle. So that gives you Like there's an empty key right here, as well as there's half key right here and here, which you don't see. So once we have that method, we can with Flutter, it makes it really easy to reuse code. So I'm not actually creating 8 different keys. I'm just calling this one build key once, and I'm doing the changes that I need to. So here I'm using that package called tonic, and I'm getting the pitch from the MIDI number. I'm able to get the name of the key. Here we specify another stack. Semantics, this is for if you have screen readers or if you have some customers that have a hard time reading. This is a really easy way for them to be able to know what you're trying to do. So in this instance, I'm passing the pitch name because the MIDI note is not going to make any sense for if they're reading through the app and not able to see. So I can also specify that it's a button so that they know that they can click on it. Here we have our material widget, which can add a border radius as well as like an elevation. So in this instance, I'm checking to see if it's an accidental. I am making the color black or white accordingly. Here's an inkwell. This is the thing that manages the actual tapping itself. So if you see that how it goes gray, this is actually called an ink splash, which is from an inkwell. Same for this bottom key. When you tap on it, this does it for you out of the box. You can change the color at any time with the ink splash property, ink color. And here what I'm doing is I'm playing the note as soon as tap down is fired. And here we have another position widget that actually is just up from the bottom by 20 pixels. And that's going to, if show labels is true, it will show the text of the label itself. Now, once I have this entire piano key, I'm reducing that so I can check to see if it's an accidental. I want to give it an elevation of 6 because if you see, there is a light shadow on the key itself, but there's not shadows here at the bottom. And that's because of this elevation property. We can change this to whatever we want. So if I did 24, you should see that it gets a lot darker. And if you get closer, so let's do 5, the shadows should get more condensed, just like that. So the elevation is really useful. A lot of properties take that. So like even the app bar, for example, right here, if I type elevation and I give it like 24, it will throw up a shadow right there. Perfect. And if we go down, once we have this, we're returning the container. We're going to, if it is an accidental, we add the elevation. Otherwise, we just return the piano key. And finally, at the very bottom, we can specify our border radius. That's so everything in the app matches. I'm only doing a border radius on the bottom. So here you can specify bottom left and bottom right. So another thing that I did to get around this this code limit is I had to, because my app works only in landscape, I could not, I didn't have enough code to be able to do that manually on inside this build method. So what you have to do, if you ever in that scenario and you don't want to do it from code, the nice part about Flutter is you can still manage that from, you can still manage all your settings because you get a native iOS and Android app. So in this example, let's open up Xcode. All right. And in this scenario, I specify that it's landscape and landscape right. So you're getting a full iOS application as well as Android application. You can add watch apps and you can do whatever you would normally do with a regular app. So definitely don't feel limited by what you can do. And then just finally, Here's some places where you can find me. I'm on Twitter as Rody Davis, as well as GitHub by Apple Educate. You can also go to my website at rodydavis.com, and you can find me on Instagram. This is the, let me show you the URL real quick. And I'll have links for this, and I'll provide links for you guys. But if you go to Apple Educate, Flutter Piano, this will have all the necessary stuff that you need to get started. Specifically, if you want to see what we went over today, if you go to the 5K branch, this is what I actually entered to the Flutter contest itself. Now, if you guys are also curious, this master branch, which I've actually been adding a ton of stuff, so you can see a more complex application for me, not limited by the size constraint, but it's still really small. So thank you so much, guys. And, I hope that this conference goes really good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is your question for Rody. Please simplify so we can take them one after the other. Questions?
Okay, so excuse me, but I've not used the app before. I'm just curious if it makes sound.
Can you hear him?
Yes, it can make sound, but there's a limitation of the iOS simulator, so I can't produce it. But if you play it on a real device like an iPhone or Android, it'll play. Okay.
So I was just curious also. You inputted just one file. How were you able to from that one file play different sounds?
Okay, so are you asking how I can play the sounds from Flutter?
Yes.
Okay, so in this example, I'm passing a sound font, and what a sound font is basically like a MIDI engine. So in Flutter, and also if you guys are curious, these are all the plugins that I've made for Flutter. So definitely go and check some of those out if you want to see more in depth different things that I've done. So if we go to the Flutter MIDI, you'll have this is what I'm actually calling. So if you see, I call Flutter MIDI.prepare.
Okay.
And that is right here. I'm passing the sound font and setting up the channel. You see it calls channel.invoke method. And what prepare MIDI does is it sets up the iOS and Android MIDI. Here we can, do the play MIDI note, and it calls invoke channel play MIDI note. So what that does is for every platform that you have a platform channel, it will call the iOS and Android code. So it'll call Swift, and it'll also call Java on Android. So here you have that same exact channel. Here's it in Swift. You have your Swift MIDI plugin. Here's the method call for what I'm calling. Here's the prepare MIDI that we just talked about. And then when I do play MIDI note, here it's actually taking my audio synthesizer and actually playing it. So yeah, with Flutter, you can use native code just like you would in Dart code. So you really can, you can use things as much as you want.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Another question. Okay.
Sorry. Can your app work offline?
Yes. Yeah, this entire app runs offline.
Okay.
Oh, great. Another question? Oh, ready. Okay. No question, right? Okay, Rody, if I may ask, is it possible for a Flutter developer to implement probably MVP, MVVM, and all of that pattern in writing Flutter applications?
Yes,
Can you can. Flutter?
You want? Sorry, say your question one more time.
Okay, so here is it. You need to build an application, a Flutter application. So what pattern works best? I mean, in that kind of environment?
So let me show you an example of a application that I'm working on. Okay, so there's a lot of different methodologies you can use in Flutter. I'm becoming a huge fan of very close to MVP, but what it allows you to do is you pretty much have a model for every version of your screen. So here, let me show you the basic folder structure real quick. So inside your lib, I usually have 3 folders. I call data, UI, and utilities. Here's my main method and my constants that don't change. Inside my utilities, I can include all my shared functions that are going to be global across my app. Inside the data folder, I usually contain like some top level models, and then I have my global models. Inside each one of these models contains just pure business logic, so that means that there's no UI. All it is just taking and modifying code. So you take that model and you pass it down. Let's go to, sorry, right here. So you can have your models. So you take your model and then you pass it down your widget tree. So now if in any screen, so right here, in any screen, I can look up that model and I pass it down. So it's a very much of a model, view, and then controller setup. Anytime that the view wants to update something, it sends it to the model, and then the model updates the screen. The screen doesn't contain any business logic, so it's literally just a front end for your model.
All right. I have one more question, please. So I was curious. The way you handle your state management, just wanted to know how you do your stuff. Provider, scope model, set states. What scenarios makes you choose certain types of state management? Yeah.
Okay, so one of the reasons why, let me give you an example of why you would want to use, not use set state. So in this example of the Flutter Piano, I have my drawer. And anytime I want to change this item in that drawer, I have to call set state in my variables here. But in this app, I have a separate class called app drawer. Now, this thing has things that change itself, but if I were to call use set state, I would have to have an on change property of the drawer and keep passing up all the changes. So every time that you have a nested widget, you're going to have to keep providing that value straight up. So in this instance, I would have to call on value changed, and then that would have to go back up the widget tree and then send back. But in this method, when you're able to use provider, this handles looking up, regardless of where you put this widget, it'll handle all the rebuilding for you. Another big reason why you want to do that is this allows you to refactor your app really easily. So I can take this and move it anywhere in my application. I could rename this if I wanted to, and I can also break it up into smaller widgets. If you're using set state by default, you have to do a lot of extra boilerplate just to get up and running with passing the data through. And then plus the widget tree itself, you can have one section over here on your app that has, like, let's say your login screen, and then you have a home widget that handles like your authentication, like your account info. But let's say you're way over here and you have a list view. Well, if this data changes and it updates your account, you have to go all the way back up to the top of your app to rebuild just this one part. So with a lot of other state management providers, it allows you to, in any part of your application, be able to rebuild your widget tree from the ground up. And not only that, it'll actually only build that one little widget that needs to be rebuilt. It doesn't have to rebuild your entire app every time.
Okay, awesome. And one more question, please.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one time I've been thinking about the use of imports. So let's say there's that file called constant, for example, and then we have about 200 lines of code with different constant variables. And then I only need, again, then I get into my activity, right, into a particular app page, and I only need one constant from that particular dat file. And that means that the only way I can actually access it is to import the entire dat file, knowing that I only need one value out of that particular import. So I was just thinking, having to import several things in a particular file into my page, does it have anything to with performance, or does it have any issues?
So what I usually do is in every directory of my Flutter application, I include an index.dart. The index.dart takes care of the exports. So if you do export, you can actually have multiple Dart files associated with that index. And it's actually it's very performant because Flutter uses something called tree shaking, so that in debug, you're able to have access to everything. But when you actually build your app for release mode, it'll go through and delete all those unnecessary imports so that your app is as minimal as possible. So you don't, as a developer, don't have to worry about importing something that you're not using, as well as so many imports. So when you actually compile it for release, that'll be taken care of for you.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Rody, one last question before we leave. Okay, as a beginner, do you need to learn how to use that before you get started with Flutter development?
Say it one more time.
Okay, so as a developer, beginner that wants to go into Flutter development, do you need to have like that experience, that language experience before you start?
Are you asking what languages you need to learn Flutter?
Okay, I'm saying that do you need to learn that before DART? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say for Flutter, are you asking what things you want to learn about Dart, like what things you need to?
Okay, so let's say that I want to start writing Flutter apps.
Okay.
Yeah, do I need like 1 year or 2 years experience in that before I get started with development?
Oh, I see. Okay. I actually came into Flutter with 0 years of experience. I was an iOS developer and Android developer before I got into Flutter, so I knew Java as well as Swift. But I actually went, even from the very first beta, when there wasn't a lot of documentation, or there was documentation, there wasn't a lot of like community articles and stuff about it. You can actually pick up Dart really easy. And I had no Dart experience, but I was still able to build our app at our company in 2.5 months, just from learning Dart, as I needed it. It's a very nice language, and it's built for the developer. It tries to make it as easy as possible to do things. It's also really similar to C#, so I was pretty used to that, as well as Java. It's very close to Java. Yeah, I would say, yeah, you can definitely learn Dart. You need to, I would say it's easiest just to find an app that you can use to kind of learn it. But yeah, the documentation and videos, and there's a lot of code labs that are really good about kind of walking you through. For me, the biggest thing that actually helped me was if you go to the Flutter Gallery app that they provide, it shows you a demo of how to use all the widgets that they give you out of the box. So that was really helpful for me to be able to see exactly how to use a widget, when to use a widget, and how to make it look good.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome.
Can we jam our hands together? All right. You have a fantastic day, Rody.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so